Hello, it's Dawn Michelle from Boho Tarot, and today I thought we'd get together and chat about the decks I worked with, some of the books I read, and other things that happened in September. September was honestly a hard month for me. I had some struggles with some burnout, which I talked about in some of my member videos. I also had some family things going on and some health issues. I ended up taking a little break from my normal routine throughout most of September and spent some time just reevaluating some of my personal practices. I just kind of needed a little bit of a reset. I also spent a good deal of time revamping my sacred and working space, which I think was actually really key in helping me to reconnect with some of the things that got really off balance for me last month. So let's go ahead and take a look at the decks I worked with throughout the month of September. So the first two decks that I worked with in September were the Scorpio Sea Tarot and the How to Be a Wildflower deck. I haven't made a bag for this yet, but I have fabric, so that is coming. I ended up working with these two decks a couple of times throughout the month. I do have a full kind of review of the Scorpio Sea up on my channel because it's been one that I've been working with for a while now. This is the new How to Be a Wildflower deck from Katie Daisy. It's not actually billed as an oracle deck, although it does have 78 cards. So I am kind of tempted to see if there is a way to relate the 78 cards of this deck to the tarot. But I have just been using it as an oracle deck, and I do find that I really, for one, I'm a fan of Katie Daisy's artwork. I have a lot of her books and her planners and things like that, but I do really like the quotes and the sayings that are on the cards, and this deck is really interesting because it does have different imagery. So one side has the quote and the other side has like a picture. Now I have put all of them going one way so that all the quotes are kind of on top. So you can see that here. And I really, really love the quotes. I love that card too. The quotes are really wonderful. The artwork is, of course, just absolutely charming. And I've really been enjoying working with this deck just kind of in a, not only in my readings, but also just kind of as a pull a card for a pick-me-up kind of throughout the day. And you can see here that the artwork on the back is like, look at that. So that is like the back of that card there. We're just talking about dreams. It's really interesting. You could, I would think, be able to work with this deck in a lot of different ways. I primarily have been working with it with the quotes. Look at that one, so cool. With the quotes on the front, and then I do take a peek at the back to see. I love that one as well. Flip that one over. Be astonished. I do work primarily with the quotes on the front, but then I do flip it over on the back to see kind of what the imagery is on the back, and sometimes I incorporate that into my message as well. But I did find that kind of like as a pairing in my normal 3-card, that's too big, so let's pull that down. In my normal sort of 3-card reading, these two decks actually work really, really well together. I really didn't do this throughout the month though. I did it once, and the rest of the month I was kind of pulling larger spreads with the Scorpio Sea and using the How to Be a Wildflower more as like a takeaway message. So there's the back of that. And that worked beautifully, but it does work really wonderful in his 3-card reading as well. So here we have the Wheel of Fortune and the Fool with See the World Between. And I think that's quite lovely. Look, binoculars. Sometimes the just the imagery on the back is actually even more powerful than the words on the front, which is quite interesting. I think this deck has a lot of versatility to it and how you can work with it. But what I found was that it worked particularly well for doing larger spreads with the Scorpio Sea Tarot, and then using the How to Be a Wildflower as kind of like my takeaway message, which is not usually how I work with Oracle. You know, usually it's my focal point. It's usually not the end of the reading, it's kind of the start of the reading. So this would be my focal point is sleep under the stars. So connecting to that energy, and then what do I need to know about that? We have the 2 of Swords and the 3 of Coins. And that is primarily how I work with tarot in general. But with this particular deck, I found that doing the larger readings with the Scorpio C and then using the How to Be a Wildflower as kind of like my takeaway message worked really beautifully. Again, I do have a full review of the Scorpio C Tarot on my channel, so I won't go into too much detail about it. But I do find that while I struggle with some of the elements of the deck, it is a really phenomenal reader. It's very direct, it's very to the point, and I find it to be a really wonderful deck for kind of just really mundane readings, really down to earth, really getting into the nitty gritty of everyday life. It works absolutely beautiful for that. Look at this, we have Forage for Beauty between Death and the Eight of Cups. And I find that as a pairing, these do work really, really well together. I think that because, as I've mentioned before, the Scorpio C is a little bit more on the minimalistic side and the How to Be a Wildflower is a bit more detailed in its artwork, that pairing tends to work well for me. I don't think I would like it as much if I were working with a really highly detailed or very busy tarot deck. I tend to kind of like to balance them out with either the Oracle or the Tarot, one of them being a little bit more on the minimalistic side and one of them being a little bit busier. And that just seems to work really well for me. So anyway, beautiful pairing. I really enjoyed working with both of these decks this month. Again, the Scorpio C really works beautifully for just average, everyday, mundane readings. It is one I do kind of intend to keep in my collection. The Sun and Moon card are amazing. I did talk about that in my review of it, but it's one I definitely intend to keep because it reads so well for just everyday stuff. I really didn't think, I'm going to be perfectly honest, I really didn't think I would probably keep it much longer after I did the initial review of it and worked with it for a while. But every time I need just a really mundane, like in the nitty gritty of everyday living reading, this deck actually works beautifully for that. And so I'm definitely planning on keeping it so that I can have a deck that, while I do have lots of decks that work really well for kind of just mundane readings, this one in particular just seems to be very well attuned to just the everyday nitty gritty of my life. And the How to Be a Wildflower deck is, I think, just, it's amazing. It's not technically billed as an oracle deck, but it very much functions as one for me, and I really enjoy working with it. This is one of those decks that I just also enjoy just pulling a card when I just need a message for the moment. I just need to take a break, take a breath. I can shuffle this deck, pull a card, and, you know, get the message that I need. So the thing with this deck, with it being super, super big, is I can't really riffle shuffle it, and that's just because my hands are small, so I kind of do have to overhand this deck. But look at that artwork. And to me, this is just a joy to sit here and look at the different artwork on the back as I shuffle through it. Sometimes I will also go through the back and I'll just look at the images until I find one that speaks to me. And I'm like, okay, this owl is calling me. What is his message? And we have Always Seek Mystery. And that works really well too. That's been a really beautiful way to work with this deck, to just not only just pull cards randomly, but to actually go through and mindfully select a card that feels like it represents my moment right now, or something that I need to know. Like maybe I'm feeling very much like this in the bottle moment. This actually kind of looks like how the weather is today. It is kind of gloomy and rainy, and I live in the Pacific Northwest. We have lots of big trees. So maybe I'm really feeling this kind of bottled up energy today. And then I can turn it over and see if my message is all things grow with love. And I do really enjoy that the messages are, for the most part, very positive, very affirmative. And so it's a wonderful deck for kind of like a pick-me-up message as well. Like here we have the spider web with the snake and the little praying, is that a praying mantis? I don't even know. It says, learn how to see, realize that everything connects to everything else. Leonardo da Vinci. So sometimes it's quotes by famous people. Sometimes it's just, here's one from Anne Bronte. Sometimes it's just little messages. So rise with the sun. But it's just a really gorgeous deck, and I've been really enjoying working with it. I wasn't sure it would work really well with tarot or as like a divination tool. When I got it, I more just got it because I am, again, a fan of her artwork, and so this was a no-brainer for me to get. So I do have the other deck that has artwork by her, but the messages are by someone else, and in that deck, the artwork is kind of secondary to the messages for me, and I feel like this connects a little bit better. The language on the cards connect a little bit better for me, so I'm really enjoying working with it. I highly recommend it if you enjoy this artwork, just as not only as a deck to work with for tarot, because it does pair beautifully with tarot, and to just use as a sort of wrap-up message or an affirmation message for your tarot deck, but it's also just a beautiful deck to pull messages for in the moment, and I really enjoyed that practice with it. So again, that's the Scorpio Sea Tarot and the How to Be a Wildflower deck. So another deck that I worked with in September was the new Paper Oracle. Now this is a little Lenormand deck that, in full disclosure, was sent to me by the creator to check out, and I have trouble with this little tuck box. I'll just be honest there. I don't want to tear it. I'm going to make it a bag because you know me and I like to make bags. Anyway, I was looking to kind of get some just real down to earth advice. And so for that, I tend to go to Lenormand, and it just so happened that this deck had just arrived and I was super excited to take a look at it. I'm not sure if it's currently available or in pre-order status, but I will definitely take a look and put a link for you in the description box below. I have the tarot deck by this creator and I absolutely love it. It's the cleverness of that deck just really kind of, I don't want to say took me by surprise, but it did, and I really enjoy it. So when I was able to get the Lenormand to check out, I was all over that. Now, Lenormand is a little bit different than tarot in that the messages really don't change based on the artwork, but I do find that I love to pull in Lenormand decks that kind of have the energy for what I'm working on or what I'm feeling in the moment. And this deck, I think, worked really, really well for that. I really enjoy the artwork in this deck. It's very different. And like here we have the clouds and there's like this crystal ball with an eye in it. Now this Lenormand is very much tied into kind of the idea of a witchy or sort of mystical magical path, which I did quite appreciate. I really love the significator cards in this deck. We have the masculine. Instead of the dog, we have the familiar, which if you read the little guidebook, which I'll take a look at here in a minute, there's some really different, interesting things. There are some extra cards in this deck, which I did leave in when I was working with it, and I did actually quite enjoy them. So here we have the house, which I just love, the bouquet, the anchor, the key. So you can see, look at that fox. Very much a, traditional Lenormand in a lot of the depictions. There's the rider, and here we have the feminine. So instead of the woman, we have the feminine. I really enjoyed that. And then we have some extra cards. We have the scale. I probably should have divided them up, but I didn't. Look at that for the ring. Isn't that clever? The eclipse. I love that. We have the tree with the beautiful little deer there. It's just gorgeous. The snake is so cool. I really, really like the artwork in this deck. And for a Lenormand, as we say, that the artwork really doesn't matter. A tree is a tree is a tree, right? But I really enjoy having really wonderful artwork. And this artwork is super clever, just like his tarot deck. Look at this broom. We'll just do a quick flip through. So we have like some extra cards, like we have the storm here. Also, the non-binary for a significator card, which I thought was fantastic. We also have the stranger, which was really wonderful. So we have the familiar and the stranger. The cauldron, again, love this. Again, you can see very tied into the witchy path. So here for the cross, we have actually somebody laying a Celtic cross, which I don't know how well that actually relates to how I see the cross, but I absolutely love it. So this card hasn't actually come up for me in a reading yet with this deck, so I'm not totally sure how I'm going to feel about it, but I do love the depiction. I love this coffin. This is amazing. The tower. It really is, just an absolutely gorgeous Lenormand deck. I really dig the artwork. And like I said, it has some extra cards that I actually really, really enjoy. A beautiful clover. So it does have also a little guidebook, which we'll take a quick peek at that. Because I probably won't do like a full-on review of this because it's just a little Lenormand deck. But here's a little bit about the Lenormand deck, and he talks about the extra cards that he's included. A little bit about reading with the deck. So we have a 3-card mystery spread, a traditional 9-card Lenormand, which is kind of what I did. And then we go into the cards of the deck. So most of the traditional cards do adhere, in his description, do adhere to traditional Lenormand meetings, which is really wonderful. And I do really appreciate that, because you can just take out, your 36 cards and just work with those as a straight Lenormand, or you can add in the additional cards, which I did, and use it. Basically, I used it as like an expanded Lenormand. So the extra cards are the non-binary, the hourglass, the cauldron, the storm, the scales, the stranger, the wheel. So that is really wonderful. I actually, normally I'm like, oh, extra cards, I usually take them out, but I didn't in this deck. I really enjoyed the extra cards. I did have a couple of them come up in a reading. I had the hourglass come up in a reading. It was really interesting to have that kind of different energy in the reading, and I really, really enjoyed it. So I really just can't speak highly enough of this little deck. Here's the backs. If you like this kind of artwork, you read Lenormand, I definitely recommend it. It was a really wonderful treat to get to work with it. It definitely has kind of a witchy feel to it, kind of a pagan-y witchy feel to it, which I really appreciated. And it was just a pleasure to really get to know it and to work with it. So again, that is the Paper Oracle Lenormand. So another deck that I worked with in September, which I was really excited to get, is the Healing Waves Tarot. And this was the deck that I backed on Indiegogo, I do believe, and it did come in. I am so excited about working with this deck. Oops, I got a card in there. It came in this beautiful little box. The deck did actually come blue gilded, so I think that was one of the stretch goals, as I think was one of the box design, which was really cool. I have really been enjoying my work with this deck. I'm gonna make some room here. I've really been enjoying my work with this deck. I've been primarily using it for my moon work this month, and I also was using it for kind of like when I needed to tap into healing energy, because that really is, I feel like, what this deck is attuned to. It's called the Healing Waves Tarot, and it definitely has that kind of a healing vibe for me. This deck, I mean, the whales, it's an ocean themed deck, and I absolutely love the ocean. It is one of my favorite places to be, and I really enjoy the artwork on it. I think it's really beautiful. I think the way that the cards have been depicted are quite clever. I think the magician as the diver. And I just love all the ocean animals and ocean energy. And I do love how even like the suit of air is, the suit of swords, and we have relating to air, but it still is tied back into the ocean energy with our seabirds, which I think was quite wonderful. Again, same with the fire suit, still tied into that ocean energy, but features salamanders. So gorgeous little deck. I've really found it to be quite a healing little deck, and I really enjoyed getting to know it. It was one that I was, really, really excited about working with. Like the whales for the Empress and Emperor just get me. This is the extra card, the letter, and the Hierophant. Now this was a very limited run on Indiegogo. I do believe the creators are still standing by their not producing any more copies of this, so it is very limited, and I do apologize if it is one that you're trying to get a hold of and haven't been able to. There were a couple of shops, I think, that picked up some copies of it, but I don't know what the current status of that is, and what how hard this deck is to get currently. I backed it on Indiegogo and have just been kind of patiently waiting for it, and it did finally arrive, and I'm really, really enjoying it. And like I said, I've been primarily using it for moon readings. It worked absolutely beautiful for the full moon in Pisces in September, and it was a gorgeous, gorgeous reading that I really, really enjoyed. So again, that's another deck that I was working with in September, and that is the Healing Waves Tarot. Now let's talk real quick about the decks that I worked with specifically for my personal autumn weave spread. So this was a spread that I shared on my channel in September on kind of how I do it. It's a spread that I use, actually, I will do seasonally for different seasons, but I shared the kind of autumn setup for that. I used the angels and ancestors, and I do keep my deck divided up because of the way that I work with this deck, which I go into detail in that particular video. The medicine mother was the ancestor that came up for me, but I keep my deck divided by all of the ancestors. This artwork is just amazing. So I keep the ancestors, and then I have all the like seasons and tools and animals and stuff in the center here, and then all of the guardians I keep at the back. And Fire Guardian was the one that I got. And so I did my kind of traditional autumn weave spread, or fairly traditional. It changes a little bit here and there for me every time, but I used that as my three main focal points, like the season, the message from the ancestor, and the message from the guardian. And then I also wove in, as the name suggests, another oracle deck and a tarot deck. And for this, I used the shamanic medicine cards and the Vision Quest Tarot. These three decks together read absolutely beautifully. So I had my kind of like my message from Medicine Mother. Again, I have a full video on how I do this spread, but then I would shuffle my tarot deck and I would pull my two cards for the actual message from Medicine Mother. I did the same for the Fire Guardian. And then I pulled a card, or rather two cards from the shamanic medicine deck for kind of my tool and my energy to tap into. And again, I pulled a tarot card for each of those for an expanded message. So that's kind of how I do it. Again, I have a full video on that on my channel. I love these decks together. I don't work with the Vision Quest Tarot that often, but I really do enjoy it when I work with it. I do think it's a bit thothy, which is totally fine for me because I am, working in the midst of Thoth studies. It does have keywords at the bottom, which at first I was like, oh, that doesn't work for me, and I'm going to chop them off. But over time, I've actually grown to really quite enjoy the keywords. I think the illustrations are absolutely beautiful. And for me, this deck works really well during the autumn season. It really has a lot of that energy for me, and the messages really do connect to the work that I tend to do during that time of the year. And it's just beautiful, beautiful deck. It works beautifully in terms of creating deeper messages with these two decks as well. So that's the Vision Quest Tarot. And then we have the shamanic medicine cards, which I absolutely adore the artwork on this deck. There's just something so beautiful, so powerful about the imagery and what is included in this deck. The prayer came up for me. The keywords and the titles and keywords are quite wonderful and really expansive and allow you to really dive deeper. And again, using tarot to dive deeper into that is just absolutely wonderful. But this is a deck that I tend to pull out every autumn. It just screams autumn vibes to me. And again, it's really connected to the type of work that I do during this time of the year. So it works really well for that. And I do tend to try to kind of pull my decks together that have a similar energy or a similar vibe. This was the other card that came up for me, the Great Mystery. Because what I'm trying to do is not so much aesthetically match my decks, right? Although I will be totally honest, aesthetics matter. I need things to look nice together. But really what I'm trying to do is create cohesive energy, because for me, the artwork is part of the story. And in order for the story to be kind of integrated and congruent, I really need it to have a similar kind of energy. So that's the reason I do kind of pair my decks aesthetically, because the artwork is part of the story, and I feel like each one of these is a piece of the story. So we have the Medicine Woman, the Altar, and the Lovers. Each of these 3 cards tell me a story, and if I were to pull in something completely different into this pairing, say the Lioness Oracle Tarot, which we're going to take a look at here in a moment, that you can see here, because it's so aesthetically different, for me is super jarring and it takes me out of the story. And so that's one of the reasons why I personally do think that aesthetics matter. And I know there's that whole hashtag going around about aesthetics and all of that. But for me, because it is a part of a story, that's what I'm looking for. And I need them to feel like they all belong in the same story, all belong in the same kind of landscape, in order for me to be able to make that connection and create that story within my reading. So again, just another couple of decks that I really, really enjoyed working with. I did use them primarily for my autumn weave spread, but then as per usual, once they're out, I do tend to kind of dip in and out of them. I did do a couple of additional readings with these 2 decks because they just pair absolutely beautifully together. I'll just take a quick peek at this pairing because it is a gorgeous one. I think that the shamanic medicine really does provide a wonderful focal point, and the vision quest really does kind of help us kind of go further into that landscape, into that story. It's kind of the theme of both of these decks is kind of about going inward and journeying through the healing process, or journeying through the process of whatever it is that you're working on. And I think these decks just work beautifully for that. And I really do enjoy working with them together. So again, that is the Angels and Ancestors Oracle, the Shamanic Medicine Oracle, and the Vision Quest Tarot. So now let's talk about the deck that I probably did the most work this month with, and that's the Lioness Oracle Tarot. This deck totally surprised me. It actually inspired a video and everything that I did at the end of the month. But I have been using this deck very specifically for healing work. Now, I originally bought this deck to kind of explore and to tap into the abundance of Leo energy that's in my natal chart, which I discovered in August. So I picked up this deck because it's the Lioness Oracle Tarot, and Lion Leo energy does feature very predominantly in this deck in a lot of the cards. There's a lot of big cats. There's also a lot of roses, and everything about this deck should have been it's not for me, but it's actually become one of the kind of quintessential healing decks in my collection now, and I've been doing some really, really deep work with it, and I absolutely love working with it. The connection that I've made to this deck and the work that I've done with it has been very, very profound. And there are, a handful of decks in my collection that I'm like, this deck, I love this 7 of Pentacles, that this deck really has a very significant and special place in my collection, and this one has definitely earned its place as a healing deck, which is what it ended up being. It was really about me working on healing, particularly in terms of creativity, in terms of what I'm working on, and really in kind of facing fears associated with that, and diving deep into some healing work where that's concerned, getting over creative blocks, working my way through some doubts, fears, imposter syndrome. This deck has been really key for that for me. And I think because of the collage nature of it, it does very much tap into that creative energy, but something about the roses and the big cats, it just all brings it together in this beautiful, beautiful healing message that I find to be really helpful. And it doesn't shy away from the hard stuff either, which is wonderful, because again, this deck has really forced me to kind of face my own insecurities and my own fears and my own doubts, and to really come to terms with those and to try and work my way through them, which has been a lot of the work that I've been doing in September. And this deck has been really, really instrumental to that. Check out this 9 of Swords, makes me laugh every time. This was a deck that I said no to for a really, really long time, a really long time. And then I finally just found myself called to it, felt like I needed it, and it just ended up being a complete surprise. So I did end up doing the majority of my tarot work with the Lioness Oracle Tarot this month, and it has been really fantastic. I definitely recommend it, especially if you are kind of maybe in a creative slump or facing some creative challenges, or maybe you just need to do some healing work. I found this deck was absolutely fantastic for that. And it's definitely one that I'm going to be continuing my work with on at least for the next month, if not probably longer. So again, that is the Lioness Oracle Tarot. And the last deck that I want to share with you today is one that I have worked with and shown many, many times on my channel. And this is the Green Witch Tarot. And this is the deck that I was kind of using for just like a daily draw, right? Not necessarily every day, but just to kind of get a message for the day or get a message for the moment or whatever it is that I needed. It's kind of like a coming home deck, which is funny because I realized when I did my Hearth and Home decks, I totally messed up my own tag. This probably should have been my deck for prompt number 1 for the deck that feels like coming home, because this to me really is. The Druid Craft is as well, but I realized that when I did that tag, when I actually like sat down to make the video, this was actually in my bedroom. So it wasn't like sitting on my shelf, and it was kind of like an out of sight, out of mind thing. And so later on when I went back and I realized, oh, this deck is still in my bedroom, because I was doing kind of morning draws with it. It's just happened to be where it was and what I was doing with it at the time. And I pulled it back in, brought it back into, my office, my reading space here, and was continuing my daily draw work, only doing it in here now. And I feel like the first couple draws I did, this deck was mad at me, like right after that tag came out. And I don't know, there was a little bit of a disconnect. We weren't really getting along that well. And I feel like it was mad at me because it was like, I am your coming home deck. Why would you think it was any other deck? So, I apologize. I was like, sorry, I forgot you. I'll show you in my reflections video, because it is definitely a deck that feels like coming home. I would put, this and the Druid Craft both right in the same kind of area for me. This is more kind of tied into coming home to my personal practice type of a thing, but anyways, kind of funny. Yes, I totally personify my decks, but we eventually worked it out. It was all good. But I did just want to show it because it is kind of my coming home deck too. And when I am feeling disconnected from things, this and the Llewellyn, and I won't pull that out because I know you don't need to see the Llewellyn on my channel again, but this and the Llewellyn are kind of two of the decks that I like to turn to whenever I'm just like feeling kind of disconnected from other things or from my practice in general, and it kind of just brings me back home. So yep, totally messed up my own tag, but that's okay. I've so enjoyed creating it anyway, and I've really, really enjoyed the responses. Okay, real quick, let's just talk about the books that I read in September, and some of them I'm still currently reading. So the first book that I have to share with you is How to Channel from the Akashic Records When You Are Reading Tarot Cards. This is a book that I bought specifically because it goes into really detailed interpretation of the Celtic Cross in relation to channeling from the Akashic Record or connecting to soul self. And so it has a really, really interesting take on the Celtic Cross. But one of the things that I thought was really cool is that there is a description or a interpretation for every single card, for every single position in the Celtic Cross. Their version of the Celtic Cross is quite similar to mine, actually, so it worked really well for me. I know there's information about astrology charts. I'm trying to find where the actual spread is. Anyway, so we have, like, if you pull the moon card in the first position, here's what it means. In the second position, third, fourth, fifth, all the way through to the 10th position, and it does this for every single card. So if you are learning to work with the Celtic Cross and you are trying to figure out what your cards mean in certain positions, this might be an excellent reference guide. I really enjoyed it. So here we have the Three of Cups in the first position, all the way through the 10th position. There is just as much detail in the minor arcana as there is the majors, which I really appreciate because we don't often see that. It even talks about the court cards. It's just a really interesting book, very, very detailed, very attuned to working with the Celtic cross. So if you are looking at kind of expanding your understanding of working with the Celtic cross, this might be an absolutely fantastic reference guide. I have found myself dipping in and out of it. I did the actual like Celtic cross reading using the positions as they are defined in this book, and it was quite wonderful. I mean, I still prefer my own because I've kind of perfected that. Here it is, the actual Celtic cross and the definitions of according to this book. And I don't think you have to necessarily use it to like, you know, channel from the Akashic records. You can just use it as a straight Celtic cross. I do believe this is an independently published book. I found it on Amazon. I guess it was printed by Griffin Digital in Sydney, Australia. So maybe it's not. It might be from a small press publisher. But anyway, there's so much information in this book. Like, I really was surprised at how much great, wonderful information was in here. I really enjoyed reading it, and I have been using it as kind of a reference guide when I've been doing some of my personal work with the Celtic cross as well. So that's definitely one I recommend, how to channel from the Akashic records when reading with your tarot cards. So another book that I read in September was Hecate, Goddess of the Witches by Courtney Weber. And this is a new book that just came out not too long ago. And it was on my like wish list for a really long time because Hecate is one of my primary goddesses or deities that I work with in a very, very particular and special way. Side note, there seems to be kind of two different schools of thought when it comes to working with Hecate. And the funny thing is the pronunciation of her name, it actually changes depending on kind of which school you're talking about. The pronunciation of Hecate, which is how I've come to my understanding of working with the goddess, is kind of like working with her in a almost primordial goddess sense. And then you have the other side of study or work with her in terms of working with her in a more modern sense, which is the goddess of witches. And in those circles, the pronunciation tends to be Hecate. Now, I do believe that either pronunciation is correct depending on which path you are following. And the reason I'm noting that is because this book definitely takes the approach of the goddess of the witches, as it says on the title page, you know, really looking at it from a Wiccan path, which I did quite enjoy, but it's not the way that I work with this particular deity. So I think if you are looking to work with Hecate for the first time, or really looking at working with her in terms of her Goddess of the Witches Association, this would be a really great book for it. I did find, you know, quite a few things that I highlighted that was like, oh, that's interesting. But again, it really is tied in more to that type of work with Hecate, or Hecate in this case, where it is really focusing on her as being a kind of archetypal deity for witches and witchcraft, and definitely ties into that. There's rituals and spells in here for that. That's not how I particularly work with this deity, so it didn't really add a lot to my personal practice because I work with her in a much more sort of primal, ancestral, instinctual way than is really went into in this particular book. But if as someone new coming into this work with this particular deity, or in terms of working with her in a magical or witchy path, I think this is a wonderful book for that. So I did just want to kind of throw that disclaimer out there. It didn't really connect for me, but that's because I work with Hecate in a very, very different way. But a great, great beginner book, I think, for getting to know this goddess in just a general sense. So another book I read, which was a recommendation from Destern at Modern Metaphysicae, was Tarot Skills for the 21st Century, Mundane and Magical Divination. This book was amazing. I just have to say, this book was amazing. It really does talk about kind of getting back to the divinatory sense of the tarot. It talks about there being a difference between, you know, working with tarot in terms of divination and working with tarot in terms of personal growth or psychological reflection, which does tend to be how I work with it more. And so it was really interesting to look at it from a different perspective. They do break down the major arcana. So here we have the Hierophant with kind of the keywords and the basic information. Then we have the mundane meaning as well as the esoteric meaning. And then in the back here, there are bunches of spreads and activities, which I am really interested in dipping into this more. I've read the book and now I'm really looking at trying to work through some of these readings just to see how they work out. It's a really interesting, very well thought out book that I think really does a wonderful job of kind of talking about, as it says, tarot for the mundane and the magical divination. There's a lot of stuff about esoteric work in here as well. So if you're interested in maybe dipping into that, that might be a really great kind of beginner primer book for that. But it was very well written and I really, really enjoyed it. So again, that's definitely one that I think I would recommend. So that is Tarot Skills for the 21st Century. So another book I read while on vacation was Grimoire of the Thorn-Blooded Witch. I first saw this book on Giselle's channel, Mad Witch, and she had mentioned that she was reading it, and I decided to pick it up as a book to dip into while we were on vacation. It is very much like taking a walk through somebody's personal grimoire, which I think is the point of it, to be perfectly honest. As I've mentioned many times, my magical practice doesn't look like this, but I love reading books like this because I find it's like poetry. There's spells in here, there's rituals, there's a lot about connecting to the natural, kind of more earthy, natural path of witchcraft, which I thought was really wonderful. And it's one that I've kind of dipped in and out of. Sometimes I use it a little bit like some bibliomancy. I'll just kind of open the book and I'll just look through it and see what pops out at me. So here it says, I join with the spirit of the sacred stone here. So I might take that and that might be my message. And so that's kind of how I've been working with it. Not so much as a reference guide, which I think is more what it's meant for, but I've been using it a little bit more like bibliomancy because although I really enjoy reading books about, witchcraft and grimoires and, it says mastering the 5 arts of the old world witchery. While I really, really enjoy that, it's not really how my practice works, but I do love to dip in and out of it. And this one is it's beautifully written and it just works kind of beautifully as like a bibliomancy, which I know it's not what it's meant for, but that's how I use it. But if you're looking to kind of maybe follow a kind of the path of the old way, really diving into kind of old school magic in a sense, I think this was a beautiful, beautiful read. I'm not an expert. I'm not like a self-proclaimed witch or anything, so I'm probably not the best expert on these types of books, but like I have had a magical witchy practice many, many years ago, and I have kind of dipped in and out of it throughout my adult life, so I do have a little bit of basis of understanding, but this is not what my practice looks like. But I really, really enjoy reading books like this, and if your practice does look like that, this might be a wonderful one for you to dip in and out of. It's beautifully written as well, so it was just kind of a joy to read. Again, that is Grimoire of the Thorn-Blooded Witch. And finally, let's talk about the fiction book that I'm reading. This I started in September, and I'm still, currently reading because obviously, as you can probably tell, I've been reading more nonfiction than fiction these days. But I picked up this one quite a while ago and it's been sitting in my to be read pile, and so I grabbed it when we went on vacation. It's The Library of the Unwritten, and it says it's a novel from Hell's Library. This is what caught me. It says The Good Place meets Law and Order Bibliophile Crime Unit. So I don't want to give anything away, but it's a really interesting story about kind of a battle between heaven and hell, and the librarians from Hell's Library are going on this quest, basically. Let's just say that. I don't want to give anything away because it's a really interesting, unique read. As I said, it's like The Good Place meets Law and Order in the realm of books, and there's like they go to other realms, like they go to Valhalla and things like that, and it's so interesting. And it's kind of talks a little bit about like the stories that don't get written, and that's what's in Hell's Library. And it's just, it's fun. It's a fun read. If you're a book nerd like me, you'll probably enjoy this. If you like stories about kind of the battle between heaven and hell and like really dipping into that, you might enjoy this. So anyway, it's just one that I'm not quite done with yet, but I've really been enjoying reading it. And that is The Library of the Unwritten. My favorite part of September was definitely watching all the wonderful responses to my Hearth and Home Decks tag. It was so wonderful to see not only all the fantastic decks that people chose for the prompts, but also to hear about their personal connection to each and every one of those decks. I want to thank everyone who participated so far. I know there are a few people who are still planning on doing the tag, so I look forward to seeing more of those over this season. So that's it for me today. I hope you had a wonderful September, and I wish you many blessings moving into October.